I will. The session will be chaired by Dr. Vinod Krishnadas. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Ma.
Dr. Vinod Krishnadas, a psychiatrist and specially trained in de-addiction and neuropsychiatry. He has an experience of 5 years in these fields. He practiced at Manashanti Main Care and Marahadam Hospital at Vilupuram. Currently, he is an assistant professor at Sri Manakulla Vinayaha Medical College and Hospital and in charge of the de-addiction unit. He personally believes that emphasizing with the suffering of the mentally ill and helping them to recover are his main goals. Now the dice is over to the chairperson.
Okay. Now we'll call on the online presentation. Dr. Kishan Anwar will be presenting on the topic inhalant dependence syndrome with comorbid psychiatric disorder, a case series. Yeah, Kishan, you can start.
Yes, sir. A very good morning, everyone. My name is Kishan Anwar, and I'll be presenting my paper on the topic inhalant dependence syndrome with comorbid psychiatric disorders, case series. Okay. As we all know, substance is one of the most prevalent mental disorders in India, and unlike other substances like alcohol, cannabis, opioids, and where its use and its comorbid psychiatric disorders are extensively studied, inhalant substance use and its psychiatric implications remains less explored. And according to a national substance use survey conducted by AIMS in 2019, it was found that 77 lakh, that is amounting to 0.7 percentage of the population, use inhalants, and it was found that it was more prevalent in Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, Delhi, and Haryana. As you can see here, 77 lakhs are the users, and where 22 lakh have problem users, and 8.5 lakhs are dependent users. Interestingly, it was also found that use was higher in children and adolescents compared to adult population when it comes to inhalant use. That is 1.17 percentage and 0.58 percentage respectively. A few brief note on what are inhalants and volatile substances. These are the chemical properties which share the common characteristics of being used by inhalational route and possessing of psychoactive properties. And these are chemicals which are commonly available, which are found in commonly available substances like household products like adhesives, aerosols, thinners, cleaning agents, etc. And when it comes to comorbid psychiatric disorders, a study done by Cloninger and Denmide, it was found that inhalant disorders had predominantly comorbid of ASPD traits. And it is also one of the drug categories where the withdrawal symptoms has not yet been diagnosed, or it is not a diagnosable entity. And there is no diagnostic guidelines for withdrawal symptoms, and there are not much withdrawal symptoms observed. Maybe this is the reason why there is less cases coming to the hospitals. So, coming in this background, I would like to present two cases of inhalant dependence syndrome with comorbid psychiatric disorders, which were under our psychiatric care. Coming to the first one, he was a 19-year-old adolescent male patient by Mr. S, who was the second in the birth order of three siblings, who studied till 10th standard with a well-adjusted premorbid personality and no significant past or family history. He was hailing from a lower middle socioeconomic status family, and he was brought to the psychiatric OPD by his mother with complaints of inhalant use in dependence pattern, which was mainly following in a pattern of he used to coat the plastic bags and used to inhale it by huffing. That pattern, it was in dependence use pattern since 2 years, and abnormal behavior was noted since 6 months in the form of elevated mood, overfamiliarity, pressure of speech, demanding behavior, provoked irritability and anger outbursts towards mother, planning new ventures for future, and decreased sleep since 6 months, which was insidious in onset and it was gradually progressive. And on general physical examination and systemic examination were within normal limits, and investigation revealed seropositivity for HBsAg antigen. And on psychiatric examination, MSD revealed a very cooperative, distractible patient with flight of ideas, pressure of speech, spontaneous speech with increased tempo and volume of speech, euphoric mood with impaired attention and concentration, and with grade 1 insight. Initially, on admission, his YMRS score was 27, and patient was initially treated with risperidone 2 mg, which was titrated to 4 mg, and tablet clonazepam 0.5 mg HS over a period of 20 days in the hospital stay. And his YMRS started to improve, and his score improved to 11 over his hospital stay, and he was discharged with the oral medications. Following discharge, patient started consuming inhalant again due to craving and was admitted again a week later, where MSc revealed irritable mood and increased sexual interest in addition to his previous symptoms. And on admission, his YMRS score was found to be 33. And in this time, patient was started on a mood stabilizer, valproate, 500 mg BD, in adjunct to his previous medications of risperidone and clonazepam. So based on this, a provisional diagnosis of F18.55, that is mental behavioral disorders due to use of volatile substances, and psychotic disorder, predominantly manic type, was made. Now coming to the second case, he was a 26-year-old unmarried Hindu male who was the first in a birth order of two siblings, studied till BCom. He was working as a dance teacher with a well-adjusted pre-morbid personality and no significant past and family history. He was hailing from a lower middle socioeconomic status of Hubli and was brought to psychiatric OPD by his parents with complaints of inhalant use and dependence pattern, which was again Tolvin, again the same, coating the plastic bag and huffing. And this pattern was seen since 3 years, and behavioral abnormalities in the form of fearfulness that someone is trying to harm him, and persecutory ideas, and decreased sleep since 1 day, which was acute in onset with no apparent precipitating factors, and it was gradually progressive. GP and systemic examination were within normal limits, and on psychiatric examination, MSc revealed a conscious, uncooperative patient with minimally kempt attire and poor self-hygiene and inappropriate grooming, restlessness, distractibility, increased psychomotor activity, and mannerisms in the form of folding hands, posing as God, with coherent and relevant speech, with increased tone, normal tempo, and volume of speech, with irritable mood, and grade 1 insight. Serial MSc revealed persecutory ideas. However, delusion was not yet confirmed. Patient was guarded. On differential diagnosis were again mental and behavioral disorders due to volatile substances, psychotic disorder, predominantly delusional type, and one more differential diagnosis was ATPD without symptoms of schizophrenia. These are my two cases. Moving on to the discussion part, it was found that toluene is the most commonly abused volatile substance. It is mainly found in many commercial products, and it's easily available in hardware stores selling adhesives and industrial solvents. And its use is not regulated. Maybe that is why the prevalence is seen more in children and adolescents than in adults, because in adolescent period it's the age where people try new substances, and inhalants is very easily available and it's very cheap, and this use is not regulated. And inhalation is the fastest route of administration of these substances. It reaches about 60% of its maximum concentration in 10 to 15 minutes, and is widely distributed among richly vascularized organs such as brain. And coming to the effects, acutely volatile substance, they exert an excitatory effect followed by depressive phase, where there is subjective feeling of euphoria, disinhibition, exhilaration, sometimes diarrhea, tinnitus, and difficulty in focusing was also noted. And tolerance of toluene was reported as early as 3 months. The persistent use of these inhalants had many chronic effects, predominantly CNS effects such as cerebellar syndrome, peripheral neuropathy, and optic neuropathy. Coming to the neuropsychiatric effects, it was mainly seen that it increases the dopamine levels in striatum and prefrontal cortex, caudate nucleus, and also in nucleus accumbens. And at receptor level, it was found to inhibit NMDA receptors of glutamate, which was non-competitively, and continuous use may even lead to damage of hippocampus. And also it was seen that it increases alpha, beta, GABA A, and alpha-1 glutamate receptor function, and chronic use led to reduced spontaneous GABA currents in hippocampus, and other neurotransmitters such as serotonin, where it increases the 5-HT3 receptor functioning, and where it also inhibited alpha-4 beta-2 nicotinic receptor function. So, hence, considering all the neurotransmitter changes and receptor changes in our case series, it is the possibility of inhalant-induced psychotic disorder should not be ruled out, and more studies are needed in this direction for mental management of this disorder. And I would also stress that laws should be implemented by policymakers so as to regulate the availability and use of inhalant substance so that its use and is regulated and it can be reduced in the adolescent and children group. These are my references. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Pa. Next, we call upon Dr. Atrio Law. I kindly request you all to stick on to time, please. Dr. Atrio Law.
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm sharing my screen.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Uh, my topic is association of severity of alcohol dependence with nicotine dependence. So basically, we are trying to see whether uh, people with a high alcohol dependence, whether they have a high nicotine dependence. As we all know, alcohol and nicotine, both of them have severe effects on the body, and chronic use of them causes increased mortality. And also, it has been shown that people who have been smoking heavily for more than 40 years have a higher chance of committing suicide as compared to those who smoked heavily for less than 10 years. And the materials and methods, it was a cross-sectional study done in our college over a period of 19 months from January 2020 to September 2021. We included 100 male patients because most of the patients presenting with alcohol dependence and nicotine dependence were male. Uh, we included them. I'll come to the criteria. The study participants were men aged 21 to 50 years. They fulfill the ICD-10 diagnostic criteria for ADS and NDS. Exclusion criteria was comorbid other substance use in last 1 year, patients with any neurological disorder, and patients with other psychiatric disorder. The independent variables were the various socioeconomic, the various socio-demographic data like age, religion, marital status, etc. Outcome variables were the SADQ, the severity of alcohol dependence, and the Fagerstrom tests for smokable and smokeless tobacco. Statistical methods, we use descriptive and inferential statistics. Coming to the sampling, uh, the prevalence of alcohol dependence in Pondicherry is 17.1% according to a study, and nicotine dependence for smokable and non-smokable tobacco is 48 and 45%. From this data, we calculated the necessary sample size, which was 60, but we took 100 participants for the study. The sampling technique was consecutive sampling technique. Coming to the discussion, the socio-demographic variables shows that uh, maximum participants were in the age group of 31 to 40 years. Most of them were married. Most of them were illiterate. Christian population was the least. Most of them had children. Uh, Unemployed was the least. Locality, rural and urban were similar, 45 and 55%. Socioeconomic class, it was also similar, middle, high and lower, 55, 45%. Monthly income, the least was 7,500 to 15,000. The family type, nuclear was the most common. Coming to the SADQ score in the group, 66% had severe dependence. Coming to the Fagerstrom test for nicotine dependence, 86% who smoked BD and Hans were found to be highly dependent, and 84% who smoked only BD were also found to be highly dependent. Coming to the smokeless tobacco, the Fagerstrom test, 98%, that is 49 out of 50 participants, were found to be highly dependent. So when patients consume both alcohol and nicotine together, it has been found that dependence on both rather than just one of them has a more severe and unfavorable course according to studies, and dependence on one makes dependence on the other easier, as smoking is known to be one of the strongest risk factors for alcoholism. The next table shows that there was a statistically significant correlation between the severity of alcohol dependence and severity of nicotine dependence. This is the table. This shows that the average SADQ score among the group was approximately 40 plus minus 9.2. The Fagerstrom test for nicotine dependence smokable tobacco was 7.9, and for smokeless tobacco it was 8.6. We did the ANOVA and it came to less than 0.00. The results showed that there was a significant correlation between the severity of alcohol dependence and severity of nicotine dependence. This correlates with several other studies which have shown similar results. These are my references.
Thank you, Atrello. I have two doubts. Okay, one is that you stated somewhere in your discussion that tobacco smoking, or nicotine dependence is a risk factor for alcohol. You mean that everybody who smokes are going to become alcoholic?
No, sir. I said that those who are alcoholics, they and like those who take alcohol and those who smoke, they have
That is about the correlation and association.
there
The
is a
second point,
correlation.
it meant that smoking, nicotine dependence is a risk factor for alcohol dependence. That's what I'm asking about.
Yes,
And the
sir, yes.
second thing, a query about the study period. Was this your thesis or something else? Was your thesis?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And how did you get patients from January 2020 to September 2020? Okay, the second part of thing is okay. But did you get cases during March to the second wave in
No,
Pondicherry?
sir. During the COVID period, we got like hardly any cases.
Okay.
But like when the pandemic stopped, at that time we got some cases.
So you got 100 cases in that last
Yes,
6
sir.
months?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you. You got to ask something? Can we call it off?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you,
Next,
sir.
Dr. Chandra. Okay, now we have Dr. K. Chandra Jyoti, who will be presenting on the topic a cross-sectional study on adverse child experiences and impulsiveness in persons with deliberate self-harm.
Good morning to one and all. Myself, I am Dr. Chandra Jyoti, second year postgraduate in the Department of Psychiatry, belongs to KAPV Government Medical College, coming from Trichy. My study topic is a cross-sectional study on adverse childhood experiences and impulsiveness in persons with deliberate self-harm. I thank all my department faculties to helping me to do this study. Coming to the introduction, deliberate self-harm is defined as intentional act of causing physical injury to oneself without intention to die. Deliberate self-harm behaviors most commonly include cutting, scratching, or hitting oneself, or intentional drug overdose. Prevalence of deliberate self-harm among adolescents is 12 to 45%, and in young adults it is 5 to 23%. Adverse childhood experiences is defined is in contact with any of the following prior to the age of 18 years. The components included are recurrent physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, an alcohol or drug user in the house, or incarcerated family member, or separation among parents, or someone in the family who is mentally ill or chronically depressed or institutionalized. Previous results show that childhood trauma and hostile experiences in early childhood will lead to negative health outcomes, including substance use, deliberate self-harm behavior, borderline traits, and some neurotic traits. Impulsiveness is defined as action without thinking. Barrett distinguished 3 dimensions of impulsion, like motor impulse, action without thinking, cognitive impulse, quick decision making, non-planning impulse, decrease in orientation towards future. Previous studies and meta-analysis proved an association between impulsivity and self-harm behavior, but in clinical studies, studies are still lacking in our region. Aims and objectives of my study are to estimate the impact of adverse childhood experiences and impulsiveness in persons with deliberate self-harm behavior, and to determine the association between adverse childhood experiences and impulsiveness in deliberate self-harm patients. Coming to the methodology, persons refer from medical and surgical wards with a history of deliberate self-harm for psychological assessment and counseling in Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Government Hospital. Psychiatric OPD were recruited as sample, approval from Institutional Ethical Committee, and informed written consent from the persons obtained. A semi-structured pro forma for socio-demographic data, adverse childhood experience questionnaire, Barrett impulsiveness scale questionnaire were administered. Materials used are semi-structured pro forma for socio-demographic data, adverse childhood experience questionnaire, Barrett impulsiveness scale. Coming to the scale, adverse childhood experience questionnaire was developed by Felitti et al. In 1998. It is a 10-item measure used to measure childhood trauma. Items are scored as 1 for the presence of exposure and 0 for no exposure. 5 questions are related to personal and 5 questions are related to other family members. Coming to the interpretation, score 0 considered as a low risk to develop toxic stress physiology in adulthood. Score 1 to 3 has intermediate risk. Score 4 and above is considered as high risk. Barrett impulsiveness scale revised was developed by Patton et al. In 1995. It is a 30-item questionnaire, measure both common behavior and preferences. Items are scored on a 4-point Likert scale, rarely or never 1, occasionally 2, often 3, always 4. Coming to the interpretation, total score was considered 30 to 120. Less than 150 is taken as low impulsiveness. They are 2 self-control. Score 52 to 75 considered normal. Score more than 75 considers high impulsivity. Inclusion criteria for my study is persons admitted with deliberate self-harm in medicine and surgical department after stabilization. Aged between 18 to 60 years were included. Persons willing to participate in the study. Exclusion criteria, persons who had previous psychiatric illness, chronic medical illness and dementia were excluded from study. Those who are not willing to giving consent were excluded. Study design is descriptive cross-sectional study. Study center, Department of Psychiatry, attached to MGMGH, attached to KAP Medical College. Study population, persons admitted with deliberate self-harm. Study period is June 2021 to August 2021. Sample size taken as 60. Coming to the data analysis, descriptive and statistical analysis done using SPSS software version 26. Results of the study, there were total 60 participants. Majority belongs to the age group of 18 to 30 years. Males 70%, education up to high school, unmarried 58%, belong to low socioeconomic status 66%, nuclear family, coming from nuclear family 37%, presence of substance use 56%, adverse childhood experiences, intermediate risk was found in 56.7% and high risk is found in 31%, and high impulsivity is found in 55% of the study population. The table shows the descriptive statistics. Then mean age found is 27.08 years with standard deviation of 8.09. Mean ACE score is found is 3.2 with standard deviation 1.6. Mean impulsivity score is 72.77. Results based on group statistics and independent sample t-test. There is significant results found among age group, family type and marital status in persons with high adverse childhood experiences and impulsive score. There is no difference found among educational status, socioeconomic status in person with adverse childhood experience. In less than 30 years and male population and those who are coming from nuclear family has statistically significant difference. Correlation analysis by using Pearson correlation coefficient. The study shows a strong positive correlation between adverse childhood experience and impulsivity. Discussion. In this study, we found out that high adverse childhood experiences and high impulsiveness is seen in person indulged in deliberate self-harm behaviors. There is a strong positive association between adverse childhood experiences and impulsivity. Among adverse childhood experiences, emotional neglect and household dysfunction were contributes to more toxic stress in childhood. Among factors contributing to impulsiveness, motor impulsiveness is present most commonly in my study. So we should address childhood trauma and ways of positive parenting and factors contributing to impulsivity to reduce deliberate self-harm behaviors in future. Thank you, sir.
It was indeed a good presentation, Ma. I have a small doubt. You want to say that there is some adverse childhood thing, right?
Yes, sir.
Could you expect some psychiatric diagnosis around that period of time?
I
During
expect
the adverse
neurotic
effect.
traits like OCD, anxiety disorders.
If they had some psychiatric morbidities then, and if they would have been treated for the same, then they'll be excluded in the current study, right?
Yes, sir.
Then the study becomes biased. It's just a
I
question.
have excluded, after concluding.
No, you had excluded all the psychiatric disorders, previous psychiatric disorders,
Yes, sir.
right? And you say that it's
Previous
study
psychiatric.
of
Known psychiatric illness.
about
Like
the adverse
OCD.
childhood experiences with the current DSH, right?
Yes.
So the current DSH could be also issue because of the personality, and there could have been multiple episodes of the same. So in that case, are you going to exclude them initially? Then the number is going to become more and more less, right? No, do you get my question?
Yes, sir.
You
Yes.
said all other psychiatric morbidities, are excluded.
Excluded.
So you want to take it as a fresh DSH. But when you go back, there are going to be multiple self-injuries.
Due to
So in that case, how are you going to handle that? So it could be one of the limitations of the study, right? You're missing something. Because if there's a childhood depression and then he comes to a DSH clinic to meet you, okay, for a risk factor of suicidal behavior, how are you going to handle this case? You will not recruit the case for your study, right? So that can be considered, and next time you can incorporate all that. Excluding all the psychiatric disorders doesn't mean to be right. Maybe dementia and other things you can look in. Childhood traumatic experiences could have had an impact on the psychological aspect of the child.
Yes.
And there could have been some childhood depression or some troublesome areas which could also be included. It's just a suggestion. Otherwise, it was a wonderful study and it's good. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we call upon Dr. Urmi Sanyal to present on the topic a comparative study of perceived stress, anxiety and fatigability in multiple sclerosis patients before and during the second wave of COVID-19.
Thank you for supporting. My study is a comparative study of perceived stress, anxiety, and fatigability in multiple sclerosis patients before and during the second wave of COVID-19 infection. Coming to the background of the study, it was the COVID-19 pandemic has actually affected largely on the mental health of general population and as well as on the chronic debilitating patients like multiple sclerosis and other chronic diseases. The second wave actually began in March 2021 and it was devastating. And on the 6th May of 2021, India became the first country to report maximum of more than 4 lakh cases within 24 hours. Multiple sclerosis is a progressive debilitating disease and with a heterogeneous neurological system, a disease characterized by demyelination due to misguided atypical immune response within the body. Earlier, it was believed to be widespread in several parts of Europe and US, but as time elapsed, it was found to be prevalent in other parts of the country. Recently, in 2011, one study was conducted in southern part of the India in Mangalore, which actually reflected that the preliminary, it revealed that the crude prevalence of 8.3 per 1 lakh of MS patients, which was much higher than the previous data. And it actually reflected that India is one of the countries with higher risk zone for multiple sclerosis in last 30 years. Several neuropsychiatric manifestations like anxiety, depression, and cognitive impairment, memory disturbances are commonly associated with MS. And several studies have reported 58 to 65% prevalence of fatigue in patients of MS. And fatigue is considered as one of the leading factors to affect the quality of life in such patients, and to some extent it accounts for disabilities. COVID-19 pandemic has affected mental health of general population to large extent and must have imparted a greater impact on patients with debilitating disease like multiple sclerosis. The effect of COVID-19 pandemic on mental health of patients with chronic debilitating disease like MS has not been studied at length, and exact figures are still unknown. The pandemic situation, including increasing number of cases, bed occupancy at hospitals, oxygen scarcity, loss of loved ones, and lockdown situation, and constant fear of getting infected, may have impacted significantly on the mental health of these patients. My primary aim of the study was to assess and compare the level of perceived stress, anxiety, and severity of fatigue in MS patients once before and again during the second wave of COVID-19. And my secondary aim was to find out any correlation between perceived stress, anxiety, and fatigability in patients of MS. The study was a prospective observational study. It was conducted once during February 2021 and again in June 2021. The sampling was consecutive sampling. After taking the informed consent from 55 subjects with a diagnosis of relapsing remitting type of multiple sclerosis, patients were recruited in the study. Three of them actually contracted COVID infection during the second wave of COVID-19, and two patients started taking antidepressants, and two were lost in follow-up. So a total of 48 subjects were able to complete the study. Perceived stress scale, Hamilton anxiety rating scale, and fatigue severity scale were applied twice on the same subject, once during February 2021 and again in June 2021. This is a brief regarding the fatigue severity scale, which actually differentiated the fatigue experienced in clinical depression from the fatigue experienced in chronic diseases like MS, SLE, etc. My inclusion criteria was only the patients with diagnosis of relapsing remitting type of MS and subjects who gave consent for the study, with patients without any history of COVID infection, those who were not hospitalized during the study period, and patients with no previous history of mental illness, and those who were not taking any medication for associated psychiatric issues in MS. Patients who became COVID positive during the study period were excluded, and patients with comorbid psychiatric illnesses and other comorbid medical illnesses were excluded, and subjects with a history of psychoactive substance abuse were not recruited in the study. The statistical analysis was made using SPSS version 22. Uh, Coming to the results, my results actually reflected the socio-demographic data being mostly affected the 18 to 35 years old youngsters, and the females being affected mostly in the study population. These are the graphical representation of the socio-demographic data, where we can see the young population, the females, and the patients with higher education, and also patients with who are self-employed are mostly more in number. Here is a questionnaire to diagnose, as we can find that the patients who were diagnosed with a psychiatric illness were excluded. Two of them were diagnosed during the COVID pandemic. Though two of them were started in antidepressants, and those were excluded. And three of them contracted COVID infection, so they were also excluded. Here is a chart asking few questions regarding the COVID related anxiety and stress and fatigability, where we can see that during the second wave, all the parameters have much more increased value. And here the worries component and the exhaustion, which reflects the fatigability and stress parts, has much reflects much more values during the second wave. This is the graphical representation of this. And coming to the result of perceived stress scale score, here during the second wave, the mean score has become 27.13 with a standard deviation being 3.46, and it reflects that there is a significant increase in the level of stress during the second wave than before second wave. And the Hamilton anxiety rating scale also reflects quite similar values, where during the second wave, Hamilton rating scale value for anxiety was, the mean value was 33.04, and it reflected a mean difference of 8.35. this is a score for fatigue severity scale, where before the second wave, the mean score was 37.65, and during second wave, it was 43.29. So the mean difference was minus 5.64, and the p-value was considered 0.005, which was statistically significant. We use
Excuse,
Spearman's
sorry
correlation
to
test to
interrupt.
assess.
Can you just stick on?
Yes.
Already you exceeded the grace time. Can you just rush through?
Yeah, actually, here in the correlation factor also we can see that before second wave and during second wave, the fatigability factor is more strongly associated with the stress factor as reflected by the RHO, and it also reflects that when the stress and anxiety is more in these patients, it reflected on the higher score of severity in such patients. Coming to discussion, as supported by other studies done in other parts of the country, in our study on MS patients, mostly the young group was affected, and the level of perceived stress was much higher during the second wave than before it, and the level of fatigability also found to be increased during the second wave. And also, like other data is available from other countries, other studies conducted on different patients and also patients of cancer. This reflects that much more effect on mental health of such chronic debilitating patients. And during the second wave, the rho value is much higher, which reflects the strong association between the fatigability and the stress component. So these are the limitations of my studies. And coming to the conclusion, we can say that stress and anxiety has reflected much more on the mental condition of these chronic debilitating patients, even much more than the general population. So so we should impart importance on the mental health of these patients to find out, to get them some helpful, to become helpful to them to fight with the fatigability factor, which is considered one of the debilitating factor for these patients. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ma. It was a good area
These are
of
the
research,
differences.
and it was a nice presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, one and all. Now I welcome Dr. Rajaram to hand over the memento to Dr. Vinod Krishnadas.